week's episode of One Piece. Thanks to the magic of anime flashbacks, we get to go back in time and see what really happened between Doflamingo, Corazon, and Trafalgar Law. Personal advice from me, if you have not watched this week's episode, skip to the 11 minute and 35 second mark, because everything before that is just fluff. Just more of the destruction of Dressrosa, the citizens killing each other, them trying to trank all these weird frickin' circus animals, just more of the same. It's finally when we get to 11 minutes where we get some more action scenes. We get to see more of Doflamingo wailing on Luffy, literally slamming him through a frickin' top of a castle down into a cavern as Bellamy is getting ready to fight and chop him to pieces. Then we go back to Trafalgar Law, who's still fighting against Doflamingo, and this segues into the big flashback all about how Trafalgar Law was trying to be an executive of the Don Quixote crime family. They're all hanging out on this junk pile island, which is known as Spider Miles, which is basically just a big garbage processing plant that's run by Doflamingo, and that's where he hides out with his goons. And we get to see all of them in different outfits when they're younger. In particular, Baby 5 and Buffalo look a lot younger. They're basically the kids of the group. You have Treble, you have Diamante, and Diamante is actually sword training Trafalgar Law. And Trafalgar Law is just so messed up looking as a kid because he's got all of these grenades just strapped to his chest, and they could go off at any second, but whatever, let's continue sword fighting. It's also worth mentioning that Trafalgar Law does not have his devil fruit yet, and he seems to be suffering from some sort of ailment that's going to kill him in a couple of years, and he wants to kill as many people as he can before he croaks it. But that isn't until we are formally introduced to Corazon in this week's episode, who makes an amazingly funny and over-the-top entrance. As soon as he appears, he immediately trips on his ass, and he ends up taking it out on Buffalo and Baby's 5, who seem to really like just messing with him, and that pretty much seems to be like their whole family shtick. What's really interesting about Corazon is that he does not speak. Apparently there was a traumatic event that happened in his childhood, so he doesn't talk anymore. But that doesn't make him any less intimidating, because he takes Trafalgar Law, tosses him out of a window, and he falls right into the middle of this giant junk pile. He basically could have killed him at this moment, and he tries to be all intimidating, lighting up a cigarette, but he ends up just lighting himself on fire, which gives us one of the weirdest to-be-continued screens I think I've ever seen in the One Piece anime series. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of One Piece? This was an okay episode that was saved by the last half. Really, we're finally getting into the backstory about Doflamingo, Trafalgar Law, and that's what I'm really interested in. There was a little bit of action this week, though, which was appreciated, especially the scenes which involved Doflamingo, Bellamy, and Doflamingo's clone. That scene where they punched Luffy through the top of the castle was pretty freaking awesome, and that's going to lead to another key battle in the Dressrosa arc. But first, we gotta get this backstory. What I really loved about the backstory was getting to see all of the different Don Quixote crime family members in like their different forms when they were younger. Doflamingo himself, I think he looks really cool in the past, very different than what we usually see now, where he's always covered in the big pink furry feathers. Now, he just looks a little more reserved, looks more like a typical mob boss with his hair slicked back, but he still looks pretty intimidating and awesome. As for the introduction of Corazon, I think it was handled pretty well. As for the introduction of Corazon, I think it was handled pretty well, and it looks like this is probably where Doflamingo got his fashion sense from his ridiculous brother, who's pretty much even more crazier looking than Doflamingo. I mean, he basically looks like a glorified clown, but he's still really intimidating and creepy. The fact that he just hates kids and will immediately toss them through a glass window into a freaking junk pile, I think that's pretty cool, and definitely one of the more crazy highlights from this week's episode. But otherwise, it was just an okay one, mostly because the first half was just a complete bore. You could just skip all of it. It's finally when we get to all the Luffy stuff, the Trafalgar Law, and the backstory that it finally starts to get entertaining, and by the time that starts to pick up its stride, the episode is done. So, it's not a perfect episode, but it's still one that One Piece fans definitely need to check out because it's really important, because it's all about the beginning of Trafalgar Law's backstory and how everything went down with Corazon and how he was mysteriously killed. We're just going to have to wait and see how that is going to unfold. This week's episode was a nice introduction to it, but I think it could have been handled better. So I'm going to give this week's episode a 3 out of 5. Just an average episode of One Piece, but still an episode that any One Piece fan should definitely check out. Whether you're a manga fan or an anime fan, check it out. You might see something you like. So, I like this episode, but what about you guys? What did you think about the introduction of Corazon and Trafalgar Law's backstory? Please tell me in the comments section below and what you hope to see from the rest of the Dressrosa arc. Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like it, share it with all of your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow us on social media. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby!